I wrote my paper on political opportunity structure and its application to the worker recovery movement in Argentina, primarily during the years of 2000 and 2004. Political opportunity structure simply is the change in a political structure that allows a movement to take place. Specifically, I focused on Doug McAdams' 4 aspects that he finds important or crucial to a movement's success through political opportunity structure. The first aspect being the relative openness or closure of the institutional political structure. The second being the stability of the broad set of elite alignments that undergird the polity. The third being the presence of elite allies within that government or within that structure. And then the fourth being the state's capacity or propensity for repression. In the 1990s, the IMF, coupled with the newly elected administration of Carlos Menem, implemented a series of neoliberal policies that not only slowed down the rampant unemployment and inflation that was going on, but also caused the sale, or brought about the sale, of a large portion of the nationalized companies to privatization. This caused a leveling or caused stability for the Argentinian economy. That stabilization not only helped internally in the nation, but also attracted outside funds from international companies. These companies invested not only funds, but also opened up new companies, new factories, new businesses within Argentina, which exploded exports, and also the lowering of unemployment greatly increased the local market within Argentina.
As can be seen from this table, the Argentinian government had made available to them from the IMF approximately $38.5 million over the period from 1984 to 2006, having drawn about $23.5 million.
Unfortunately, the primary tool of the IMF and the Menem administration used was dollar parity. Basically what happened is they tied the value of the Argentinian peso to the US dollar. While in the short term, over the beginning of the decade and the middle of the decade, that definitely increased the value and helped create a booming economy. In fact, the IMF used Argentina as its shining example. At the end of the decade, due to the dollar increasing, the peso not being able to keep up with it, other crises that were happening within South America and also around the globe, the Argentinian economy once again started to falter. Unemployment started to rise. Inflation, again, especially towards 2002, rose greatly. As this happened, the Argentinian economy was no longer stable. In fact, in a short period of time, the government went through 5 presidents. This lack of stabilization caused not only problems within the national companies, but also international companies, as the exports began to shrink and also the economy within Argentina slowed. Companies fled. They went bankrupt as they were no longer making money. This process left workers within Argentina with no income, no idea if they were going to have a job come the next day. The result of that was what's called the worker recovery movement, which is what I'm discussing, labeled the ERT, as on this slide you can see the Spanish name for it. And basically what they did is they had to occupy these abandoned buildings so that they could resist forces that were there to sell off the buildings, sell off the assets. And these companies that were in bankruptcy, the workers did this so that they could be the first recipients of any funds or any benefits that went through in bankruptcy court. The result of this movement was mixed. Lagging support in some areas, especially in the guise of municipal governments, bankruptcy judges, and regional governments, did not allow some companies, even though they worked in the same process, to succeed, while in other areas where there was more support, many of the companies did succeed. Part of the important part of that was that it had become a process. While these companies are quite varied and do not share many common bonds, they do share the bond of this movement of the occupy, resist, and produce. Part of the benefit of becoming their own company was deciding how they were going to do it. One of the ways that many of the companies were able to succeed was to use a law that was already in the books. Cooperativism was a process that was already known in Argentina. It's known throughout the world. It's been in existence since the mid-1800s. And they were able to use what's called a worker cooperative, which had laws already in the books. And through that process, they learned to become more successful, at least those that chose to go this way. Just as I said, cooperativism was not unknown in Argentina. Neither was the worker recovery company or worker recovered company. Prior to the 2000 to 2004 period and after, as you can see from this slide, there are approximately 20 recovered companies that moved through this process. But it was during that period between 2002 and 2004, when the crisis was at its greatest, when the instability was at its greatest, that the largest number, about 123 of these companies, came into existence. And that was directly related to the issue of unemployment, the desire for these employees to just make sure that they have a paycheck at the end of the day and at the end of the week. So then, if we refer back to the four aspects that McAdam deems important for political opportunity structure, the openness or closure of the institutional political system or structure, we can see that, as I described before, where that structure was more supported, where the movement was more supported, where there was more openness, it was allowed to succeed, where on the other hand, where that was not supported as much, while there were still some successes in the readings that I had, they were not nearly as significant. As to the stability, I actually found that kind of to be the opposite. It was during that unstable time of 2000 to 2004 where administrations were changing, things were up in the air, the IMF was back and forth, they abandoned Argentina for a little while, then came back. It was during that time that they were actually able to, where the largest number of companies actually were recovered. However, as you can see, now that Argentina has stabilized, that process has still been allowed to continue through to 2008. The presence of elite allies, obviously, as I mentioned, you have the support of governments. You also have union and other movement supporters that help to bring in knowledge to these companies as they came online. And finally, the state's propensity or capacity for repression. The greatest amount of repression that happened prior to this period was the neoliberal policies themselves. It was a free market. It was a privatized situation. The social industry, socialization of industry was really not allowed. So as you can see, it was political opportunity, the change in the government, the instability that came about it, the change in the IMF policies or the failure of the IMF policies that allowed this movement to succeed and to progress.